Chapter 5. A Strange Lunch. I began to visit Luisa Piccarreta's house when I was 5 years old, taken there by Aunt Rosaria. When I became a little older, I would often take Luisa baskets of fresh fruit which my father picked on our land. On various occasions, my aunt made me stay to lunch at the Piccarreta house. Luisa did not eat with us because she was in bed in her room, and it was there that she ate the few grams of food that she took every day. One day, curious, I watched the menu that was being prepared for Luisa. Her whole meal was on the same plate. It was a Sunday, the day our family ate orecchiette, ear-shaped pasta shells, with meat sauce. No more than 5 or 6 orecchiette had been put on a plate, with 3 or 4 grapes. My aunt, seeing my surprise, looked at me compassionately and smiled. At a certain point she said, "Take this plate in to Luisa." More surprised than ever, I took the plate and carried it to the room of Luisa, who was in bed. She had just put down her lace-making work. A serving tray had been set before her, on which a cloth was spread, where I put the plate. She gave me a deep look with her large eyes, without saying a word, took a grape, and popped it into my mouth. I left the room while Luisa was beginning to eat her strange lunch. I had hardly sat down at table when we heard a bell ring. My aunt got up quickly, took a tray, and went to Luisa's room. I followed her instinctively and unwittingly saw something that left me perplexed. Luisa vomited all the food that she had eaten, unspoiled and whole. The most extraordinary thing is that she felt none of the discomfort or unpleasantness that usually accompanies vomiting. My aunt removed the serving tray from her knees, put it aside, drew the curtains round her bed, closed the shutters, and said to me, "Let's go now, because Luisa has to pray." When I got home, I told my mother all about it. She was not in the least surprised, since she had known of this phenomenon for some time. Luisa actually never ate nor drank. She lived on the divine will alone. This phenomenon lasted for almost 70 years, through thick and thin. Out of obedience to her confessors, she was obliged to eat at least once a day, even if she vomited everything immediately afterwards. The Broken Promise of Mortification. One day, it was a Sunday, I was at Luisa's house, when she called me and said, "Today is Sunday. At home you will be eating meat. Leave a little for baby Jesus." I assured her I would do so. However, having left Luisa's house, I forgot everything, including the promise to leave some meat for baby Jesus. It should be emphasized that in those days, meat was a luxury food, only eaten on feast days and in small quantities. I enjoyed eating my meat, having forgotten the morning's promise. Luisa, on the contrary, had not forgotten at all, and as soon as I arrived at her house in the afternoon, the first thing she said to me was, "You forgot the promise you made to baby Jesus." I was dumbfounded and did not know what excuse to make. Aunt Rosaria alleviated my embarrassment by saying, "He's only a little boy. What can he understand?" But I realized that her unsolicited answer did not satisfy Luisa. A prophecy. My family, deeply religious, wanted one of us boys to be a priest. Given that my father's branch of the family had been richly endowed with priest, and a cousin of my mother's was then Vicar General of the Diocese of Salerno at the time of the famous Bishop Balducci Montasuri, I only remember that she spoke enthusiastically of him. The eyes of my family were focused on my brother Agostino, a tidy, well-educated, hard-working, and reserved boy, a suitable type for an ecclesiastical career. Aunt Rosaria was very pleased when my brother expressed the wish to enter a seminary. The opinion of our parish priest, Father Cataldo Toda, of venerable and holy memory, was very flattering. His clothes were prepared. My aunt prepared a cassock with lace borders. Everything was ready for my brother Agostino to enter the seminary of Bisceglie. However, an unexpected event then occurred which upset everything so that my brother never did enter the seminary. The cause of it all was Father Andrea Bevilacqua, who recommended that Agostino, his pupil in middle school, not be sent to the seminary, but wait until he had completed at least the 5th year of secondary school. He would then enter Molfetta Seminary directly without having been to the minor seminary, which Father Andrea did not think could guarantee an adequate formation. Aunt Rosaria was very upset at this event, and one day complained to Luisa. After having spent so much, Agostino will not even be entering the seminary. It should be said that Luisa had already previously proved silent and indifferent to this plan, although Agostino diligently visited her house, and although she knew of his intentions, Luisa never gave him a word of encouragement, as she had to other boys who had expressed the same wish. Luisa responded to my aunt's complaints in my presence by saying, Rosaria, Rosaria, you are trying to substitute God's will with your own. The Lord does not want him. And turning her eyes to me, she said to her, Look after this one, because the Lord wants this one, and not that one. Aunt Rosaria was amazed to hear the words of Luisa, who said, Yes, this very one, who is the rebel of the family. In fact, I loved street life. I was very lively and surrounded myself with poor children. My companions regularly played truant from school. They went about barefoot, smelling of the hens, sheep, and rabbits that were raised in their homes. Therefore, I did not work very hard at school either, and was the despair of my middle-class family. My mother was a teacher, and my father a municipal employee. I did not attach much importance to Luisa's words. I was only in the 4th year of elementary school. There were big social problems. The collapse of fascism, the German occupation. Schools were closed and food was scarce. I completely forgot Luisa's words. After Luisa's death, on March 4th, 1947, my Aunt Rosaria often thought of what Luisa had said and began to look at me inquiringly, as though she wanted to detect any signs of my inclination. Later, to the great wonder of all, Peppino, the rowdiest boy in the district of Via Andria, entered the seminary, not the diocesan seminary, but the Seraphic Seminary of the Friars Minor Capuchin of Barletta. It was 1948. A year had passed since Luisa Piccarreta's death. Many bet, given my character, that my stay in the seminary would not last long, and that I would be a nuisance there too. Many even criticized my mother for rashly having allowed me to enter it. Time proved these inauspicious predictions wrong, and the townspeople began to give credit to the words of my Aunt Rosaria, who proudly told everyone how Luisa had prophesied that I would be a priest. Aunt Rosaria would say with determination, "Peppino will succeed in becoming a priest. It is God's will, expressed by Luisa." A rough sea. Several years passed. My mother and father had died prematurely. Our large family was dispersed. 3 of us were married. One sister in Trieste, another in Bologna, my brother in Switzerland. The house, emptied of us, was lived in with our consent by Aunt Rosaria. By then I was a theology student at the Studentate in Santa Fara. I had already received the minor orders and the diaconate. During the summer, all the students moved to the friary of Giovinazzo. The building, virtually overlooking the sea, was an ideal place to spend a holiday, and the major seminary was also based there. One day, in August, we went to the beach. The sea was very rough. A rash student flung himself into the water and was instantly submerged by the breakers. I and another 2 companions, expert swimmers, dived in after our confrere, but because of the turbulent water, we were swept away by the waves, flung against the rocks, and sucked back repeatedly. In these circumstances, half dazed, I meditated on my death and said to myself, "I will not be a priest after all." Then I called upon Luisa and said, "Luisa, the saint, help me," and abandoned myself without reacting. At a certain point, I felt my body grasped by the hands of the other confreres, who dragged me to safety before the waves sucked me back again, once and for all. I emerged from the water, bleeding and with cuts all over me, but alive. Luisa had saved me, together with the other 3 students, my companions in misfortune. The following night, I dreamed of Luisa, who looked at me with those great eyes of her that were imprinted upon my mind, but she said nothing. Was it a premonitory dream or delirium? It is true that during the next days I had a very high temperature, but I then recovered from the illness. The following year I became a priest. I was ordained by the Archbishop of Bari, at that time Archbishop Enrico Sisodimo, in the Capuchin's Church at Triggiano on March 14th, 1964.
End of chapter 5.